Welcome to the Marine Ecology Podcast, where we share conversations with the world's leading experts in marine ecology and conservation, offering in-depth looks into some of the most exciting developments in the field, as well as the lives and perspectives of the human beings behind them. I am your host, Christian Wagner. Today, I will be speaking with a good friend, Brady Bradshaw. Brady has in some ways lived two lives, one as an elite freediving athlete and another as a prominent marine conservationist. He holds the current United States national records in all three pool distance freediving disciplines, one of which I had the opportunity to personally witness. At the time of this recording, he has set 13 United States records and 4 North American records. In some circles, his name carries as much weight as any top-caliber Olympian or extreme athlete. While he has become something of a living legend in American freediving, his decade-long career in marine conservation has left perhaps an even greater mark on the world. He was a key player in passing the Shark Fin Sales Elimination Act, effective December of 2022, as well as in developing California state legislation aimed at reducing plastic waste on the California coast. He has an impressive track record working with those in power to enact change, but is also a successful grassroots activist. He has previously founded the Coalition for Protecting the Pacific, as well as the San Diego Plastic Free Seas Coalition. Currently, he serves as the Senior Oceans Campaigner at the Center for Biological Diversity, where he is working to phase out offshore drilling operations on the California coast, with a focus on retiring old gas and oil infrastructure. Give it up for a remarkable human being, Brady Bradshaw. You've done a lot of different things. You've had a huge career in freediving, as well as contributing to a bunch of different marine conservation initiatives over the years. And so I think we're going to cover a ton of ground in this conversation. So I'm super excited to get into it.
Yes, man. I'm really happy to be here. I think this is going to be a great podcast. Excited to get into this conversation.
Yeah, what sort of led you towards marine conservation? Because I know at one point you were thinking about, do I want to be a scientist? I think you mentioned in Australia, maybe you're going to grad school for that, and what kind of changed your course into conservation and more applied activism activities?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I mean, my journey through undergrad actually is kind of where it started, because I wanted to be a veterinarian at SeaWorld. That was my first kind of obsession with the ocean, was sort of my obsession with orcas, and I just wanted to be close to them and wanted to, diagnose issues that they were having and sort of learn about them. I was fascinated by marine mammals as a young college student, but then I watched this documentary called The Cove, and it sort of flipped my world upside down when it came to SeaWorld, and I just felt all these emotions, because in that documentary they show SeaWorld being sort of complicit in the slaughter of dolphins in Japan, and I just sort of started to dawn on me that captivity is not the place for these amazing beings. And then, like less than a year, maybe a few months after that, I kind of unfortunately or fortunately witnessed a BP oil disaster while I was in undergrad. So that was a major moment for me. It was a major moment, and I hope that people always remember what happened in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010. It was at the time the worst environmental disaster in U.S. history. Oil spilled for, I think it was 67 days, just gushing into the Gulf of Mexico, and it enveloped such a massive amount of the sea that when I was flying over the area, I could hardly see any area that wasn't covered in oil. Mostly what things that I remember were seeing a lot of pelicans and dolphins and whales in the oil and coated in oil, unable to swim or survive.
And so were you in Florida at this time?
I was in Alabama.
Alabama? Did you grow up in Alabama?
No, I was visiting my girlfriend at the time had a home in Alabama, so we were just happened to be visiting at the time. It was almost as if the universe just kind of plopped me into this series of events that really opened my eyes to some of the major impacts to the ocean.
you didn't go immediately into oil as a conservationist. You did a few things along the way. And so was this always the place where you wanted to land? Like, having conversations with oil companies and attempting to reduce the scope of their projects in offshore drilling sites?
Yeah, well, when I witnessed the spill and I saw BP's behavior in response to the oil spill, which was, one, downplaying the impact.
So how were they downplaying the impact? Because the oil spill is out for everyone to see. Mm-hmm. You saw it from a plane. What were the tactics they employed to downplay the impact of the oil spill?
Yeah, well, the first thing that happened was my girlfriend's father called the Coast Guard, and they were working with BP in what's called a unified command, and someone from BP directed them to not allow anybody to fly over the area, and that was like, what is BP doing?
Probably citing some phantom safety concern.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and we flew over anyway. So that was the first thing. And the second thing was they started to report that the oil spill was being cleaned up as it was still spilling. And they actually created a YouTube campaign that was aimed to say, the oil spill is being cleaned up. It's not that big of a deal.
And they would just film short clips of some oil spill cleanup activity?
Yes.
While the leak is actively occurring.
Yes. And so to us, we witnessed the real scale of the cleanup, which was we're up in the plane watching these boats, and they weren't doing anything. They were cleaning up just maybe the smallest amount of oil out of this massive expanse.
Just with like absorbent, basically sponges. Is that how this is done?
They were dragging booms through the water. So they're just basically dragging oil through the water and I think collecting some of it, but it was negligible amounts. It was very clear that the response was not.
It was dramatically dwarfed by the scale of the disaster.
It was just like, okay, this is the behavior that this oil company is committed to. So at that point, it became clear to me that somebody needs to prevent them from doing this again. It felt like a massive, maybe lifetime purpose, and I still feel that way today.
That's when the spider bit you?
Definitely.
All right.
Yeah.
So how old were you at the time?
I was 20.
20? So you're in college, and then I saw you were involved in some college activism groups.
One of the first things that I did on campus was we were driving phone calls into our utility provider because they were part of a greenwashing group, which is...
And can you explain what greenwashing is? Because This is a term not everyone's familiar with.
Greenwashing, this is a prime example of greenwashing. So I'll just kind of give the example and I'll also explain.
All right, yeah.
It's that, a company is saying that they're sustainable and green when they're actually doing the opposite. So in this particular case, it was investing in a group called America's Coalition for Clean Coal Energy, and it was a front group to allow the expansion of more coal plants in the U.S.
Yeah, so clean coal is going to be the ultimate greenwashing example.
Exactly. There was a huge movement at that time to brand this thing called clean coal.
Which is basically just regular coal, but the emissions are filtered a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. Whereas the extraction of coal is still just as dirty. Many of the pollutants that are still coming out of the smokestacks are causing the planet to go into a warming spiral, and they know it, but there's an out for them to say, well, we're changing the way we do business and we're becoming sustainable. The same thing's happening today with carbon capture and sequestration. This is by and large a greenwashing scam.
When you say carbon capture, what are the main ways of doing carbon capture? Because you hear people throw around this word, carbon capture. Isn't the most common example of capturing carbon is like a tree, or a plant.
Yes.
And so how are people capturing carbon?
Yeah, nature does not scam us when it comes to carbon capture. Trees, kelp forests, they're really good at carbon capture. And the recently invented technologies that are unproven, such as pulling carbon from into these machines and trying to condense it into carbon dioxide, One technology that's being developed is meant to capture carbon dioxide gas and pump it into oil and gas wells, like old oil and gas wells. And the idea that you would hope would happen is that you could pump carbon dioxide down into those wells and that it would be permanently sequestered in the earth. But what's actually happening is yes, in gaseous form. So, but it's an unproven technology, and more often, what I think we can expect to see is that carbon dioxide is just going to leak right back out. Meanwhile, the company gets to say, we've stored this amount of carbon, so we get to produce this amount of carbon dioxide. And what's even worse is that in some cases, they're using that carbon dioxide gas to pressurize more oil, in order to pressurize wells to get more oil and gas out. So it's an extraction project being branded as a net zero emissions
interesting
thing. So I kind of try to think about like how much of ancient history the practice of burning fossil fuels is, like how much we take it for granted as a society.
Yeah, it's just crazy to think about also how finite it is. An oil well runs dry, right? It's there's a time limit on the whole industry.
Yeah, and that's exactly why a lot of the companies are seeking to do enhanced oil recovery, such as fracking, hydraulic fracturing, technologies that aim to, go further, deeper, horizontal, diagonal into different rock formations and try to pull out the last remains.
Because fracking results in what people refer to as natural gas.
Yeah.
Which is kind of seems like a greenwashing thing too. Oh, it's natural.
100%, especially when you see it on the side of a bus that says this bus is powered by clean natural gas.
Yeah. But I have heard it is more fuel efficient than just regular like oil, gas.
Yeah. Well, there's many ways, like people need to look at all the aspects of these conversations. Energy is a very complex issue, and like you need to understand that maybe, burning methane in some regards, yes, it has less carbon dioxide emissions, but it also has a lot more. It's emitting methane, which is, their estimates between say 20 and 60 times is more potent as CO2 in terms of its impact on warming the atmosphere.
Yeah.
At the same time, methane has less residence time in the atmosphere.
Because I think a lot of this, it's an optimization problem, right? You talk to people on one side who are like, don't want to think about the environment, right? These are people driven, they're not necessarily like bad people, but they're seeking something other than sustainability, which is, profit, or, they have a duty to uphold to their business stakeholders, make their company as most valuable as possible. And then you have people on the environmental side who are like, see every car as like, oh, that's bad. Like burning stuff is bad.
Well, this is where true energy and climate experts come in. To understand that the climate crisis is a crisis, that we are deep into the climate crisis right now, that the Earth has warmed faster than than most climate scientists had predicted, and we're already in it. And so to respond appropriately is necessary. That's physical reality. And we also, need people that are experts in the energy field to take this seriously. When someone works for an oil company, they can't take it seriously because, as you said, they have a profit motive, and that's their main job. And it's like, at least 40 hours a week, 24/7, that's their focus, is to make profits. Clean energy is not profitable for corporations in general. It's cheap for people, which is wonderful. If we had rooftop solar that was, on many of the homes, which, by the way, oil companies have been fighting and utilities have been fighting people getting access to rooftop solar for many years. And I think the bigger problem is that oil companies have an outsized influence in our political process. So people that don't have the interests of the earth, the climate, the people in mind are gaining access through their profit margin to be able to fund politicians and have more access to politicians than other interests like environmental groups or even community groups.
Yeah, 'cause, I mean, it's interesting that you say that. Like, you know, I talk to people of all different backgrounds, and a lot of, you know, some people believe the free market will naturally solve fossil fuels, because you look at things like nuclear fusion, which, you know, nuclear fission energy, which involves the splitting of atoms, right, creates a lot of radioactive byproducts that last a long time. And so that's generally been the main thing preventing fission from being super popular. But fusion takes everyday stuff like hydrogen, helium, gases, and fuses them into better understood, not so radioactive compounds, and produces way more energy. And I actually read this year in France, they sustained a fusion reaction for over 22 minutes. And to give in perspective how much better fusion is than like fossil fuels, 90 million degrees Fahrenheit. That's the temperature of that reaction. So like,
whoa.
You know, you have private sector people who are like, oh, the free market will correct this because there's just better options. It's more efficient. But when you have them interfering in the free market as well, like preventing solar roofs and stuff like that, that kind of throws a monkey wrench into that whole theory.
Yeah. And so the other part of it is like externalities. And companies are, you know, if you're a really skillful corporation, you will minimize your internal costs and externalize them. And one of the climate change is the biggest externality of the fossil fuel industry that they're currently not paying for. So, you know, the organization I'm working for is advocating for them to pay for climate damage finally after all these years, because we know that Exxon knew in the 70s that their fossil fuel combustion was causing climate change. The climate scientists predicted at that time very accurately the carbon dioxide levels and the warming effect that fossil fuel combustion would have on our climate up until present day. So they knew in the 70s what was going to occur over the next 55 years very accurately. But at that time, they closed their climate program because there was a decision made within Exxon to say this is not in the interest of making us profits.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, I'm sure those guys who did that research were really talented too. Yeah. It kind of makes me wonder, like, how much knowledge exists in private companies that is world changing. Because if we knew in the 70s, so much would be different. Like, think about how America has changed since the 70s.
This is why when people ask me, like, what's your proposal for solving the problem of our energy crisis that we're in, or whatever, like, my answer is usually we need to stop fossil fuel money from influencing our politics, because I see that as the root of why we don't have clean, free energy by now, or at least something closer to that, where people have like cheap, clean energy. If there were informed decisions being made about, based on what we knew in the 70s, if there had been informed decisions being made throughout that period of time, that we would be a lot closer to having 100% renewable or clean energy, or at least energy that didn't have such negative externalities on all of life on Earth. The way I look at it is that it's like as if you had a giant quilt and every species is a thread in that quilt, and now we've lost so many. At a certain point, it will no longer be a quilt. It'll just be a pile of strings, and every species that's lost weakens the integrity of the whole.
Yeah, what do you say to the person? Because I've talked to people with a wide range of ideas. I've talked to people who are like, we can all just live off the land and live in harmony. I've also talked to people who are like, human beings can withstand the vacuum of space with technology, and so why should we even care about the environment? Because we literally send people to the moon. We're going to have people living on Mars. Who cares how inhospitable, this is not me talking, yeah. But someone might say, who cares how inhospitable the world gets? Because we can literally go to Mars. So if we just build more infrastructure to withstand the horrible weather occurrences, the hurricanes, the heat waves. As long as we're okay and we can grow synthetic foods, our species will be fine. So that's the range of opinions we're talking about here. And those you often forget sometimes if you're surrounded by ecologists and stuff, you forget the second group exists. And there's everywhere in between as well. So what do you say to the person who says, like, okay, great, you love animals, I love people?
Yeah, this is why when you ask me this question, I'm like, I really don't know. I really don't know the way, but I think that you know, a lot of us have this imagination that's beautiful, that imagines ways to solve problems, but we're not sort of looking under our own feet, and that there's, like, as long as we're focused on solving problems in order for humans to be better off, we won't be including, like, all of life on Earth, and we'll just continue moving farther and farther away. So I don't know the way to get there, but I think there's a lot of, like, wisdom to be found in understanding the natural history of the land that we're living on. And again, like, I don't know what the takeaway or the lesson is from that, but I think what I'm trying to say is we're at a nascent stage of re-understanding all that the Earth has to offer, and that we'd better protect it while we're trying to rediscover all of these, for lack of a better word, services that the Earth provides. You know, it's like this whole conversation about solutions is, I think the important thing is that we're engaged in the conversation and that we're sincerely engaged. Like, I think it takes going through a stage of grief, and this is my personal experience, mostly where I'm speaking from, is that to be able to sort of look at the status of, like, what we've done to the Earth so far, how fast that's going, how fast the rate of extinction is going of plant animal species, and to grieve and to be like, whoa, this is a serious time. I'm not saying that people should be sad and angry. I'm not sad and angry from day to day. I feel joyful in most of the work that I do, but I think it's like recognizing the magnitude of the harm that's coming to the planet Earth and making a judgment of our own values and what are the things that we're willing to put a little bit of our effort in towards each day.
Yeah, so it's almost like a spirituality that's lacking from our society that prevents us from seeing the gravity of what's going on.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes a lack of understanding, which is understandable, that not everyone goes through a ecology or marine biology education.
Yeah, because some things you don't care about until you see it. Like, for me, I remember I had this was actually the first time I ever freedove, or freedived, however you would like to say it. I fell in love with freediving and with kelp forests on the same day at Monastery Beach in Monterey, and I was doing my introductory course, as one does, and yeah, I just remember I was, like, swimming on my back through just a really healthy kelp forest full of all of its inhabitants, and I was just like, wow, this is awesome. And you know, you do feel very connected, and, like, a lot of really scientifically minded people might want to discount that experience, the feeling of connection, but you cannot live as a human being without some aspect of that. So,
you know, nature provides such a sanctuary mentally and spiritually for a lot of people. Every single person's ancestors spent a lot more time in nature than we're currently spending. So when you get that immersion experience, I think it does make people feel more identified with and spiritually connected to that. And so, like, that's one reason why I love freediving so much, is because it helps people totally immerse in the ocean.
Yeah, people aren't going outside. That's a great point. I remember in college, so I was in leadership in my school's outdoors club, and I remember it was like the first year's weekend. We were welcoming the new students to campus, and I was holding up a sign, and I was trying to get people to, be interested in our club and come hike with us and stuff. And one of the things I would say sometimes to people as they walk by is that, so are you interested in the outdoors? And then they would come talk to me, and they were like, yeah, I love the outdoors, so I want to go on a hike with you guys. And I remember, you probably know this just from being an activist. A lot of the time when you're just tabling, people just tell you to fuck off, right? And this one person...
Most of the time.
Yeah, almost all the time. And then I remember I pointed at this one person, I was like, are you interested in the outdoors? And then he was like, no. Just trying to get away from me. And then there was like a parent or an adult, not a student, was behind him, and he was like, that's a lot not to be interested in. And I think that just cracked me up, because it is a lot not to be interested in. It's everything, and for someone to be able to live a life and say, I'm not interested in the outdoors, just wasn't an option. Like even 100 years ago.
Right.
Like, how can you you can't survive. Your whole life is outdoors.
Yeah, the response would be, what do you mean? Am I interested? I am in the outdoors.
Yeah, even if you're in a shelter or like even a castle, if you're like in medieval Europe, like the whole world wasn't a castle, and only a very small number of people actually lived inside of those. So like your average human was just like always outside. And that's just a different world than we live in today.
And for the vast majority of our evolution, we had a completely different understanding of nature, and that understanding of nature was that we are it. So now we talk about nature as it's a separate term, where you can go see nature, or you can keep being in the real world.
Yeah, it's like nature, my life. Mm-hmm. Two things. And then maybe to bring it back to what we were talking about earlier, like that wall dividing those two things, if we can somehow dissolve that barrier, perhaps that would move us towards something better.
It's just like the conversation about externalities. What companies create these, externalities where they can put them off and say, oh yeah, we're not going to deal with that in our finances. That's going to happen outside of the company. When everything is out in plain sight for everyone to see, your impact on the environment is direct, and then it comes back to impact you directly, you're not going to dump a battery in your own, watershed. You're not going to dump oil in your own watershed. You're going to protect it with your life. If somebody came to pollute your water, you would protect it with your life. Most people today are protecting the gas pump. They feel that way about the gas pump because that's the kind of story of our culture, is that is sort of the basis of our life.
A lot of people might point to Christianity as one of the sources of like maybe how we're out of touch with nature. A lot of it, though, it's just what you emphasize, right? If you look at Genesis, the story of Adam and Eve, God created the human to tend and care for the earth, right? He gives him a job to do. He doesn't just make a human and say, oh, he gives Adam means the man in Hebrew, right? Gives Adam a job to do. And we're failing at the job right now, basically. Mm-hmm. And so you don't even have to look outside of... You don't even have to find a new religion or a new spiritual backdrop. Every religion does have an appreciation for nature. Every ancient religion.
People like to criticize when you come across that way and say, oh, what, you want us to just go back to, the primitive times?
Yeah, Stone Age.
I think it's, no.
I would have loved to snorkel in a Stone Age coral reef.
That would be amazing.
But,
And, there is a version of the future where something like that is possible, where we allow the ocean to recover and go back into full bloom. And, my dad and I we don't agree on politics, but when we have been together on a coral reef, he's been the one telling me that it's devastated. And I've been like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I've never seen anything like it, because he dove it 40 or 50 years ago. He was like devastated to see it in the state that it was. And I was like, wow, and that was over such a short period of time when it comes to evolutionary history, that what's possible in my lifetime or my child's lifetime for the recovery of the ocean. And I think for me, like, the ocean is actually such a great source of hope, because it has such an ability to adapt and recover, because there's so many forms of life and there are so many strategies that exist in the ocean for life to persist. So I'm excited to see if we can just stop harming the ocean so much for the possibility for it to flourish and recover in a new way.
Yeah, 'cause, I mean, life originated in the oceans, right? The sea is a great place for life to exist. It just is. And everything is connected in the ocean as well. Like, you can't see anything in isolation. Like, I actually met a person. I worked at a lab a couple years ago. When you met me, I was working at this lab. And this dude was he was just taking like a bucket of seawater. And there's a bunch of degraded DNA of all the creatures from the ecosystem that live in the area. And there's just a bunch of DNA floating around in that bucket of seawater. And he's trying to use that to make a guess of species abundance, relative species abundance. And that's really cool. Like, a sea urchin, it doesn't have blood. It just basically uses seawater as blood. Like, everything is in the medium of the water is hyper connected.
Life in general is, to me, almost infinitely intelligent, because it is informed by all that is and all that ever has been.
Define intelligence the way you're speaking about it.
This is going to sound really hippie. I hope it doesn't.
All right, go
for it.
But
it's connected. Like, we can point to the connections between all of life. We can find ways that every single being on this planet is connected. Whether it be as simple as saying, I can exhale right now, and in 10 minutes, a sloth in somewhere across the world will inhale my same breath, or whether it's talking in a more complex way about the way that, the fish that I'm consuming today is, a result of the predation of, a predator eliminating something that was competing with that species, and that fish ending up in the sea that got caught by the person that served it to me.
Yeah, if I were to translate that to like a hyper quantitative person, I would say your intelligence is like the preservation of information, right? Like, information is stored in the ecosystem we see today about its history and about each other, right? The behaviors of animals reflect the behaviors of other animals, right?
Yeah.
Like, one species' fight or flight response tells you what its predators need to kill it. Like a squid, right? Emits ink. Its predators probably utilize vision to hunt it, or at least ink producing squids. I don't know if all squids produce ink. So, like, information is stored in an ecosystem. It's undeniable.
Yeah, it's the encyclopedia of the way of life. Like, the Earth is this massive encyclopedia, and as species go extinct, we rip out pages of the encyclopedia, and our understanding of life becomes less. So, to me, there's our brains, which are capable of creating all sorts of stories and ideas, but they're also a result of evolution that has come from this same encyclopedia. So when we eliminate species, we eliminate the basis of knowledge of what we can possibly know. This is that paradox of, like, humans are currently discovering so much, and we're also currently destroying so much. And I don't mean to be a doom and gloom. Like, this is just kind of, again, it's kind of like that facing reality I think is important, but, like, I want to say to any aspiring activists out there, like, you don't have to be sad or angry all the time. Like, that's something that I feel like, I got this call from my mom when I first started doing activism, and she literally said, "Don't become an activist," because she just didn't want me to be a sad, angry person.
I want you to be disappointed
Yeah.
if things didn't go your way.
I don't know. She didn't want me to end up being a sad, angry person. And, you know, there's definitely times.
I've met sad, angry environmentalists.
For sure.
I've also met sad, angry anti-environmentalists.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's possible for anyone, of course, but my wish is that environmentalists can do their work with joy and fun too.
Yeah, I think it's important. Yeah, just what you were saying. Stay connected to what brought you somewhere. I heard somebody talk about being a scientist, and he said, like, to stay connected to why you're excited about science in the first place. Because, you know, I'm a math person, and I love the sea, and I'm going to use math to study the sea. But I could go my whole career probably without looking at the water. My work is done on this laptop right here. You got to stay connected to what got you there in the first place, or you're going to not have any joy in it, probably. Mm-hmm. Even if you're an environmentalist and there's an oil spill, right? You need to stay connected to why you even care. Yeah.
That unexplainable thing that makes you so excited. And, like, for me, I've always just, you know, I think a lot of people are fascinated by marine mammals. And so, like, for me, the same reason that I do activism work and do advocacy, that it's at the base of that, is the same reason that I freedive, is because I'm fascinated by marine mammals and their ability to dive deep in the ocean. The fact that mammals, something that I grew up thinking of like squirrels and dogs, and then learned that dolphins are mammals too, that something so closely related to me can dive incredibly deep in the ocean and hardly breathe, like, very much at all, when we have to breathe all the time.
Yeah, or you even have animals that sleep underwater that breathe air.
Yes.
Like, what?
Yeah. Learning about their physiology and their behaviors is just incredible. The dolphins that swim while they're... Some of them will swim and sort of be shepherded on the outside by another dolphin so that they keep one eye open and one eye closed. And they take watch for each other for about 3 minutes and sleep like 3 minutes at a time. And so they're like sleep buddies. They're just making sure that each other are going the right direction, not running into anything.
That's crazy.
Like, to me, it's love. That's what I describe it as, like, love for the earth, love for marine mammals. Like, it's something that excites me so much to know that they exist and that there's still a lot more that we can learn from them if we choose.
Your Instagram is Brady Orca. Your competition wetsuit says Brady Orca. Why?
Part of this goes back to the story of when I started to want to work for SeaWorld and then realized quickly that I, like, despise SeaWorld. There was an orca in particular at SeaWorld called Tilikum, and Tilikum, I think, killed or nearly killed 2 dolphin trainers, which is a job that I wanted to have, is one of the things that I saw myself doing. And so I was sort of experiencing this like death of who I wanted to be, which was either a dolphin trainer or a veterinarian at SeaWorld. Yeah, I just became fascinated with orcas because we call them killer whales. So there's this fear aspect where we think they're these big bad animals, but they've never attacked a human in the wild, except for maybe those, you know, the yachts in the, but then even then they weren't attacking humans and trying to harm them. They were just kind of ramming yachts.
Yeah, no one's ever been attacked by an orca. I think there was one, I actually looked this up, I think there was one attack, like, in the 70s, but he didn't die. And who the heck knows how that happened?
Right, interesting. Like, did they like, were they messing with it or like getting close to its babies? Like, you never know.
Also, an orca, it's the size of like a school bus. If that orca wanted that guy dead, he would be dead.
Yeah,
you
for
know,
sure.
And it's crazy. You see so many of these encounters in the ocean. of just an enormous, like, people don't understand how big orcas are. And, like, I saw this YouTube video of an open water swimmer being approached by an orca whale. The orca just comes over on its side and just touches its nose to this woman's foot. And this whale is like 10 times her size lengthwise, and then probably mass, probably 100 times her mass.
Yeah.
And, like, it just is curious. And
Yeah.
I think when you look at an orca for the first time, you see no humanity in it. Then when you observe their behaviors, you see a lot of humanity. And then when you understand their language, not understand is a big word, but when you learn about their language, culture, customs, it's like looking in a mirror, right? They have kingdoms, right? They have these resident pods. Mm-hmm. You know, they're queendoms, actually. There's one matriarch, and they operate like a total squad. And the matriarch is calling plays when they're hunting. She's calling all the shots. And then there's the nomadic tribes that are like smaller pods, speak all different languages. And when they hunt, they're perfectly silent. Like those YouTube videos of the leopard seals getting attacked by like groups of 3 orcas in the Arctic. Or I don't know if they're leopard seals or whatever kind of seal. They're doing it in complete silence and coordination, and it's practiced.
Yeah, they're so fascinating, and it's that cultural component too, which is really interesting. And they're one of the species that we can see evolving in a divergent evolution. So they're becoming different species because they're now no longer able to breed with each other, or don't because of their cultures. I've been more focused on the southern resident killer whales because they're critically endangered, and so that's been a big focus of my work.
And where is that pod
that's
located?
In their range actually spans from Monterey Bay up to close to Alaska. So
these are the ones you see hanging out in British Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But they're largely based in the Puget Sound. They spend a lot of their time in the Puget Sound and along the coast of Oregon, Washington, British Columbia. And there are 73 of them left. So that's a very small number in terms of genetic diversity. And they're like at a pretty critical point in their survival as a species right now.
So it's becoming a big problem for them inbreeding?
Yes, yeah. Inbreeding, but the major problem is starvation because they eat mainly Chinook salmon, and the rivers that usually support those salmon are mostly dammed, and also in a lot of cases are now becoming too warm for the salmon to survive. So there's a lot of mitigation. There's a lot of things that we need to do to take care of.
Yeah, and think about it's just
population.
A perfect storm for these orcas too, because that's one of the very human things about orcas is their dietary preferences. They will go for this one species of fish. We do the same thing. How many people eat cow? And that's like their main protein source. It's the same for orcas, or they'll take a shark down and they only eat the liver. What? Like, that's so human. That is such a human behavior. Like, kill a whole cow and only eat the filet mignon. Or only eat the bacon of the pig or something. And it's like, I just see so much humanity in that. But it's such a tragedy for them because if their primary food source is this salmon, and that's super selective, and then the salmon always go to the same river. They can't just go to any river. That's just hardwired in them to go to this river that now they can no longer reproduce in.
Yeah. It's tricky though because they are, at this point as they're evolved, like if you look at a resident orca versus a transient orca, the transient are much larger and their teeth are actually longer, so they can pierce the flesh of like a shark or a dolphin. The resident orcas can't because their teeth are shorter. They're meant to capture salmon, and they're specifically designed for that. The Chinook salmon, the spring Chinook salmon, are very fatty, and the reason that it would make more sense for an orca to hunt particularly that salmon than any other fish is because at this point there's a lot of actually ocean noise that is like sort of limits the amount of hunting that they can even do. So orcas will abandon a hunt when there's too much noise because they just can't effectively hunt, and it'd be like a waste of energy. So
It's probably uncomfortable too.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable. I mean, you and I have been underwater when boats have been speeding by.
Oh yeah, I remember doing like a 40-meter dive in LA. Oh my gosh, you hear that motor? It's like your whole body is just vibrating. Like, I don't think people understand, because people don't free dive, so they don't understand what a marine mammal goes through. And you and I have just a fraction of the sensitivity that these animals do.
Exactly.
And I'm literally sitting on this dive line, I feel like a boat is right next to me. Like, I feel like a submarine I'll turn around and there's a submarine behind me. And it's like, I get to the surface and I don't see any boats. And I'm like, what on earth just happened? Like, where the heck was that boat? And I see far in the distance some boat. What the heck? Like, that sound travels and it is really powerful.
Yeah. There's all this mitigation that needs to be done in order for the southern resident killer whales to survive. And like, we fortunately last year got state endangered species protection so that state agencies can start to take measures to protect and kind of devote resources to the conservation of southern resident orcas. And I think we're going to be advocating for them to get state endangered protections in California this year, because part of their range goes into California, and that the actions that would come out of that would ideally be resulting in more protections for Chinook salmon, which would provide more prey for them to survive.
Would we ever breed salmon for these orcas to eat?
That's an option. It's a good kind of, it's a short-term fix. Hatcheries are already existing, so people are doing this. The danger with that is that the genetic pool becomes sort of polluted, and that we would have to continue that program into eternity.
Have you seen that video of an orca just snapping a shark like a toothpick?
No.
Oh, it's like a drone footage. There's tons of videos, drone footage of sharks. They're like, oh, look how close this shark gets to the surfers. And it's just like, happens every day.
Right.
At a certain point, who cares? And then you just see this drone footage of the shark, and it's like a big great white. Pretty cool. Out of nowhere, it comes just like a missile. Like, it zooms out a little bit, and out of nowhere, you just see this orca going like 5 times the speed of the shark and just obliterates it. And it's like, you just saw the great white shark, like the most feared animal in the world. Poetry, legends based around the great white, and then you saw this orca make it look like a blade of grass.
Right.
These things are killer, but not to humans. To sharks, though, if I was a great white, I would stay away from orcas.
Yeah, it's like, you can have this orca just take out a great white nearby, and then the next moment it could be just like gently swimming by a human, because it's very aware of what's there. So,
Yeah, work-life separation. I just love orcas. I wanted to talk about them with you,
yeah.
A fellow orca lover. We talked about orcas preying on sharks. So this is a good segue into something you have a ton of experience with, is the shark fin market. Because you played a big role in banning shark fin sales. And so some people might not know that sharks are targeted for their fins, but I guess it's a huge problem. And can you explain the shark fin industry? Like, who are the key players? What products are made from the shark fin? And what are the effects it has downstream?
Yeah, there are a number of countries that actually allow fishing fleets to go to sea, catch sharks, cut off their fins, and discard the body of the shark and bring back tons of fins. So these fishing vessels are going out and catching massive amounts of sharks, killing off massive amounts of sharks, and coming back with a boat full of fins. On often the sharks are left to just die without fins for long periods of time. It's super cruel.
They just toss them back. Like, they just take the fins and they don't even put the thing out of its misery.
Right, it's not efficient to do that. So in a lot of cases, they're just cutting the fins and going. So a lot of people see these animals as beasts and are somehow able to compartmentalize. I can't pretend to know what that's like, but the bottom line is the United States was allowing and facilitating the trade of these shark fins. There were some U.S. fishermen also catching sharks for their fins, but also they had to bring the shark back to shore with the fins attached. So it was a more sustainable industry. And for that reason, like, U.S. lawmakers did not want to ban the sale of shark fins in the United States.
So they catch the whole shark. It's alive when they bring it to shore. Then they cut off the fins and kill the shark?
Yeah, and then they would sell the shark meat as well. So there's different forms of shark fin, kind of targeting fins for the sharks. One is where you just go and get the shark fin, leave the shark at sea. Another is where you can bring the shark back and,
And in the United States, they do the latter kind.
They had been doing that kind, yeah. In many states, in California, shark fin soup was banned in, I think, early 2000s. But most states allowed the consumption of shark fins.
Do you know how valuable the industry is estimated to be?
No, but I do know that 73 million sharks a year end up having their fins consumed.
So, 73 million sharks a year. And are there any species that are targeted specifically?
Yes, for shark fins.
Yeah.
It's for their fins, it's the taupe shark, which is also known as the soup fin shark. So they have, I think, like sort of longer fins, and you can kind of get more bang for your buck from those sharks. And
where do they live?
I've seen them off of La Jolla, actually. I don't know their exact range, but I think they're, kind of widespread.
What are the ecological consequences, or why is this a harmful practice?
Well, sharks in general are one of the sort of regulators of the ecosystem. They help keep certain species of fish population in check so that other species can compete with them adequately. So it's just a balance issue. Sharks help to, just like wolves and orcas, they help balance an ecosystem. So, the massive consumption and driving certain species towards threatened or extinction or endangered or extinction status was a huge problem, especially if this industry was going to continue as usual. The United States being a big player in it was a huge problem because it enabled the trade through major ports in the United States. So this was a huge priority, was trying to get a federal ban on shark fins in the U.S., and we saw it as an opportunity to work across the aisle with Republicans and Democrats to get a massive movement. And that was initially it was very easy to do. There was a lot of Republicans and Democrats interested in passing this law. But there were some very powerful Republicans from Florida, the two senators from Florida, who got in our way for many years. And despite an overwhelming majority of support in Congress, this bill was hitting roadblocks. So my major objective was to get the Republican House, the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, to support the shark fin ban, because he was a very powerful person on the Republican side. And through a series of activities that, I took part in, and I went to Bakersfield, where Kevin McCarthy's from, and just educated.
He's from California.
Yeah, he's from California.
All right.
And I just worked with a lot of community members in Bakersfield and got them informed about this issue. And they went to Kevin McCarthy over and over again and just said, "We really want you to stand up for this issue."
And that's his congressional district, and those are his voters, so he has to represent them, or he won't be elected.
So he kind of took the fight with him to Congress, and he became a champion for passing the shark fin ban.
What was the most difficult thing that you encountered?
Probably people in Congress introducing bills that were weaker to try to circumvent this bill.
What were the weaker versions?
There was a shark fishing sustainability bill that on its own was not a bad bill, but the strategy with introducing it at that time was to try to kill the Shark Fin Sales Act. So that bill came in, and a lot of members of Congress were saying to each other, don't worry about the Shark Fin Sales Elimination Act. This bill is actually more important. And we had to counteract that narrative and say, they're separate bills. The Shark Fin Sales Elimination Act, we've been working on it for years and years. Don't stop now. We have to pass it this year. And so that was, I think, the biggest struggle was, we gained all this support. There was just sweeping nationwide support for this bill. And even among Congress, but things can happen like that where somebody tries to kill a piece of legislation through means like that. It's a strategy to try to, get a different version of what people wanted. There were some arguments. They weren't good arguments. They weren't even, it was more the reason that the bill wasn't passing was because two powerful senators from Florida, Senator Rick Scott and Senator Marco Rubio, had powerful friends in the shark fishing industry in Florida. So they didn't want to see the bill pass.
So it's just follow the money and there's your answer.
Yeah.
I hate it when stuff like that happens because it's very disillusioning.
It is. And this is exactly why we need watchdogs, like groups, environmental groups that are watchdogs. And a number of people that I know have, brought up like, who are these environmental groups? Who's paying them? Whatever. And well, a lot of it's funded by people that care, that donate to the companies or to the nonprofits. And we're not the ones that you should be skeptical of. Like, we're the ones that are being watchdogs on some of the worst political maneuvers.
Yeah, because you guys don't have any codified political power. You're just a voice and eyes in the room, basically.
Our power lies in people, is people speaking up for what's right. And the people that we're going up against, their power lies in, we're going to pay to gain access to members of Congress. So
yeah, money is a highly effective tool in American politics. And yeah, it takes a lot to overcome a powerful donor, it seems. Let's talk about some of your current work at the Center for Biological Diversity. I know you've already told me there are limitations on what you can and cannot share about ongoing and future projects because of the nature of the work.
If folks remember the pipeline, there was a massive pipeline spill in Santa Barbara in 2015. It was known as the Plains All-American oil spill or the Refugio State Beach oil spill. It was what experts now believe to be about 450,000 gallons of oil spilled from a corroded pipeline onshore, and much of that oil ended up leaking into the sea and killing hundreds of marine mammals and birds. It was a major disaster for Santa Barbara. It's been 10 years. Coming up in May, it'll be 10 years since that spill happened. And there is currently a company from Texas trying to restart that same pipeline that caused that initial spill. So not only was it so corroded in 2015 from aging that it spilled, now it's 10 years later, and it has been sitting in the ground for that extra decade. And the attempt is to restart the pipeline because it's connected to 3 offshore platforms that they.
And the offshore platforms you're referring to, anyone who's been to Santa Barbara or like LA has looked offshore at night and they've seen like lit up structures.
Yes.
This is what you're talking about.
Yes.
Okay. And so these are permanent installations, a couple miles out to sea and connected by just a tube that runs from this platform along the seafloor back to some refinery.
Yes, it runs to shore. It runs along the coastline. It goes to a couple processing plants that process the crude oil that's produced. And then that oil also runs to Bakersfield to be distributed to the oil market. And some of that oil will go overseas. Some of it will stay here. But more likely, what's going to happen is if this unit restarts, it is likely to spill again.
Why is that? Can't they just patch up the holes or replace defective, corroded elements with newer stuff? Because not every pipeline spills. Or maybe that's just wishful thinking.
Well, yeah, spilling...
You could probably make a tube that doesn't leak. I mean, am I crazy for suggesting that?
You know, a lot of... spilling and leaking is the status quo for the oil and gas industry. There are thousands of oil and gas leaks every year in the Gulf of Mexico. They're probably underestimated. There's some great resources out there from Google and SkyTruth that show the amount of oil and gas spilled every year in the Gulf. And of California, all of the infrastructure is extremely old and past its expected lifespan. So we can only expect more oil spills if the current infrastructure is continued to be used. Ideally, leak detection is good, but in the case of the 2015 spill, the company's response to seeing a decrease in pressure in the oil pipeline was to turn up the pressure and to turn up the valves even more. So it ended up spilling a lot more oil. You know, we've seen the pattern of the oil industry. They spill oil routinely. This company has shown already defiance of state cease and desist orders, and then they just sued the Coastal Commission and said, we're going to continue to do our work. So they've already shown a pattern of disregard for the law, and we're not expecting that they will change that path.
You know, if you're fine, or if your legal action does not incur a cost that exceeds how much profit they made during the illegal operation, nothing's going to change. You know, it's just another fixed cost for the oil company is the legal action.
Right.
It's kind of I've never thought of it in that way before.
Yeah, and this is a different campaign than anything I've ever worked on before, because now this company is going outside of the law, and we're having to think about, okay, how do we reel them in? How do we ramp up the level of enforcement that's currently being applied? So
yeah, I've heard about this for super rich people. As long as your car doesn't get towed, what's a parking ticket, right? If you're a billionaire,
yeah,
what's a parking ticket? As long as your car doesn't get towed and it's not inconvenient, you just pay that ticket. You're basically just paying a larger parking fee, and if it's still small to you, you can park wherever you want. You're just paying for a service, essentially. This fine is just the fee of a service. You probably have to pay some money for the permit. There's a second permit out there. It's very expensive, but it's the no permit, and it's just it's just a fine.
Well, in this case, the company is not going through a permitting process because it's going to cost them time, and they don't want to lose time, but they would rather pay the fines. It seems like they would rather pay the fines.
I wouldn't be surprised, because every second they're not pumping oil, they're losing money. They're paying employees, et cetera, et cetera. Also, with increasing anti-fossil fuel regulation, right? They probably are seeing the writing on the wall a little bit. We talked about the finite resource of fossil fuels, especially with other energy sources rising in relevance. If I was behind closed doors in a fossil fuels company, I would be trying to extract as much as possible now, because who knows if you're going to be able to do that in 10 years, 50 years, 100 years? Right. Probably not in 100 years.
And at the end of the lifespan of those oil rigs, which they have passed their lifespan, but at the end of the lifespan of the oil rig, the company is required by law, but by the lease that they signed with the federal government, they're required to remove all of the infrastructure that they put in and plug the wells and abandon them properly. That's a very expensive project, and it also doesn't end up making them any money, but it's something that they're legally obligated to do. So by restarting these wells, or by even appearing as though they're going to restart them, they are able to avoid that responsibility for the time being. So they're...
Why are the oil companies responsible for plugging that well? Because they're probably going to try and do it in the cheapest way possible, right? And it's not going to work very well, probably. And so why not just increase the price of the permit and bring it to the state which really the state is in charge of protecting the natural resources of its own shore. So why not just increase the price of the permit to include the cost of installing a good plug on that well?
In the current day, if somebody wants to establish a new drilling operation in the Gulf of Mexico, there's no new drilling allowed in California, in California waters.
Oh, so if you close up, that's it.
There's a lot of legal things happening right now between the Biden and Trump administration. Biden permanently withdrew the Pacific Coast from leasing for new oil and gas. Trump has claimed that he was able to rescind it, even though it's not legal to do that. Anyway, if somebody wants to do a new drilling operation, they are supposed to put up bonding amounts, which are basically an insurance that says if we spill this amount of oil, we will be financially responsible. And we also are going to be putting up our bond for decommissioning at the end of its lifespan.
You can't rewind time with money, though.
You can't. Yeah, money won't account for the damages. But in a lot of these cases, like, the law wasn't written well to protect people and the environment from oil companies back when they were getting their leases and permits. So the best option we have now is to hold them to the highest standard we can possible for decommissioning and oil spill cleanup responsibilities.
Man, such a mess. I mean, I can't help but feel like the generation of our children is going to look at us and be like, why did you use oil? Like, why the heck? Because it is far inferior to some of the emerging fuel sources. Back in the 1800s, whaling was a huge industry in America and around the world, and whaling was an energy source. They would kill sperm whales, extract oil, and that would light the lamps in the cities. Anything you needed a flammable substance for, whale blubber, whale oil, that was the primary way you do it. I'm looking at an electric light bulb right here. That would be fueled by sperm whale oil. Isn't that crazy to think about? Yeah. Now it's powered by electricity, which is powered by fossil fuels. But yeah, I guess what I'm saying is I hope someday people see fossil fuels the way we see the whaling industry.
Right.
It's such a foreign idea now. Like, we need some lamps. Let's go kill some whales. Well, it seems so strange a concept and an inefficient process. And I hope that soon that will be the way things are viewed.
There's a polarized debate about it, because when you look at the comments on some post, it's like someone's saying, end fossil fuels, and the next person's saying, you're like 100% renewable energy. That's crazy. Like, the reality is, like, we need to aim for ending fossil fuels now. What I focus on is these ideas, like, of the current president wants to expand offshore drilling, which would mean that if we created a new lease, that would lead to 40 or 50 years of oil extraction offshore. 40 or 50 years into the future of like producing new oil from new fields without, there's not even much better technology to prevent oil spills. To me, it's a matter of getting serious as the United States, if we want energy independence and don't want to play a part in this global oil trade, we need to develop domestic energy that can be produced without participating in that at all.
So when you talk about energy independence, this is something that I feel like has only been talked about like in the last year, or at least I've only been aware of it. I'm not a very political person, so it could have been around longer. But is energy independence just a slogan to benefit American oil producers? Or is this actually a valuable goal?
Yeah, I think it's been weaponized by oil producers to say the only way we're going to be energy independent. Meanwhile, the same companies that are advocating for energy independence in the U.S. are producing oil in other countries to ship to the U.S. And they're producing oil in the U.S. to ship to other countries, and they're fully aware that we're trading oil as a global commodity. So it's a farce, and it's a weaponization of the term.
These are international organizations that have oil fields across the globe. We're just buying it from the same people.
Yeah. And it's a consortium of oil companies that trade oil across the globe. You know, if we can give people more free energy like rooftop solar, if these interests can stop interfering in people gaining free energy for themselves on their homes, which is happening, we don't have to pay them. But I also advocate against oil drilling offshore in particular, because an oil spill, drilling for oil offshore is twofold. If it doesn't spill into the sea and cause direct impacts on the ecosystems, it'll spill into the atmosphere and cause more impacts.
All right, I like how you framed it that way.
You know, the ocean, as I mentioned earlier, like the ocean to me represents hope, because it has so much adaptability, and also kelp forests are this massive machine for storing carbon, and every ecosystem has its own version of kelp forests. Like on the Atlantic coast, sargassum, there are ways that the ocean has of storing carbon that are so powerful. So when we damage the ocean from an oil spill and then continue to burn fossil fuels, we're not only like piling on the work that the ocean has to do, but we're weakening the ocean for the work that it has to do.
Yeah, because the ocean is resilient, and it is amazing at stuff is just so good at surviving. What we see today are the winners of the whole narrative. Life has been on Earth for billions of years. These organisms we see are like you can think of them as like the most highly trained survivalists out there. And there's so many organisms that died when these ones survived. And you can see ecosystems persisting very vibrantly with many different assemblages of species. You see, right, some species might overlap partially in its range. And like two species of fish, or the southern sea otter, right, which is the one you've got in Santa Barbara and along the Central California coast, overlaps with certain species of fish. But outside of that otter range, it also thrives under wholly different circumstances, in different numbers. The sea can reestablish itself. We just have to allow it to, right? I think that's how I've framed it in my mind. If you just allow it to survive, it will, because it has, and it will continue to do so. But if we continue aggravating, right, it's like a tendon that won't heal, right? If you keep testing your torn Achilles tendon, it's going to stay a torn Achilles tendon.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what an oil spill every decade will do, is keep tearing that Achilles tendon and keep preventing the ecosystem from reaching the potential that it needs to be at in order to provide, you know, all of the amazing abilities that it provides, like fixing carbon at a accelerated rate, and, you know, allowing the return of maybe an apex predator through a fully functioning ecosystem that, you know, can kind of restore to something like its former glory. In areas that are impacted by oil and gas, we're keeping them suppressed. Look at the Western and Central Gulf, constantly dumping pesticides into that environment, changing the chemistry and changing the makeup of life in the Gulf. And at the same time, we're piling on oil and gas infrastructure all over the place in that area. So it's really become a sacrifice zone that if we were allowed to rest and recover for a while, it could become something like Monterey Bay.
Yeah, but we'll have no way of knowing. Like, because Monterey, I think this could be totally false, but yeah, I've heard that Monterey Bay, like that marine sanctuary area, is like the most biodiverse place on the planet in terms of species count. I don't know how that compares to the Amazon. I don't even know who said that or if I dreamed it, but I believe it. And yeah, who knows, like, other hot spots for this, like the San Francisco Bay, for example. My whole life it was like salt evaporation ponds. It was such a bleak scene. Like, you drive past there, you roll up the windows, it smells awful, disgusting. And then on the south side, they closed up a bunch of the salt evaporation ponds. And I came back from college one year and I drove past it and I was like, where am I? Like, I thought I was lost, and I was like, no way. This is just all like amazing wetlands. It took single-digit years to do that whole transition. Maybe not the whole transition, but to make a huge improvement. They did actively do things like dig moats and little channels for water to flow through. They had to reestablish the flow of nutrients in the area. But after that, it was very hands-off. Things naturally reestablish themselves. There's not sea otters in there anymore, but there's river otters that have now come down from the rivers, and they're actually, you can see them in the bay near the coast. Back in the day, though, like, you think of San Francisco Bay now, it's like disgusting. You can't see your hand if you go diving in there. It's like death-defying almost how dark it is in there, and I only know like 2 people who have freedived there. Back in the day, you could see the bottom. Like, apparently they described it as being shingled with sea otters. It was so vast, a sea otter nursery. You see smaller river mouths providing a similar service, but San Francisco was like, you think about what the bay is, it's a huge estuary. And this was the place. Now, nothing. Gold rush happened, everything changed about that place. People are saying there's a chance those animals could reestablish themselves if we just introduce them and we allow them to survive. Like, I don't know, I just have... The word resilience carries a lot of meaning to me in ecology, and I really believe it.
Yeah, that's where the hope is to me. I mean, that's why I have hope for this planet. I mean, a lot of people think that we're kind of doomed. It's just, I used to kind of look at my activism like, okay, there's a threshold, because I think one of the message I was getting from the climate movement and climate scientists was like, we cannot pass this threshold of 350 parts per million in the atmosphere. By the way, we've already passed it, and now we're at 400 something, I think 430 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. And, like, my first response to that is like, okay, well, game over, we lost. But I think it's worthwhile at any point to just, whether or not that planet is going to reach, whether we're going to lose many more species to come just because of what's already been set in motion, I still think it's worthwhile to say I stand for the protection of what's left, and that at some point it will recover. And it's still up to us at what point it will recover or start recovering.
I mean, people always underestimate how good species are at recovering. They point to physical limitations, etc. But coral reefs is a great example of this. Mm-hmm. Coral reefs are not well understood. How they get from island to island, the fact that you can see the same species of coral in one isolated island as somewhere else is remarkable. Like, how do they get there? People talk about larva dispersal. And how do larvae travel between reefs, and how do you get genetic mixing between these reefs that are so far apart? When it's just like, literally, think about a feather floating on the wind, just getting blown around. That's a similar process to what's happening here. But you see coral everywhere. Like, everywhere the condition is right, there's coral, or there was coral and we killed it. It's an amazing group of species. And you read like oceanography papers that are like, oh, the larva dispersal distance for coral is this. which is not enough to get to that island. And then lo and behold, you look over there and they're breeding together. So
that's the mystery. Like, we don't know everything, and we never will know everything. Like, I think that's what's so beautiful about kind of just saying, okay, well, we know what we know. Doesn't mean that science is inadequate. Science is the best we have. And it's worth it. It makes the most sense to like stick to ecological principles when attempting to, benefit an ecosystem and help it recover. But yeah, also knowing that there is always going to be an aspect of life that's mystery and that we don't know. And as a lot of my professors in college told me, the spirit of science itself is curiosity. So knowing that you can think you know a whole lot about something, but when you lose your curiosity, that's when you've lost the spirit of science.
Heard it from him. All right, you want to take another break? Yeah, you're going to Bakersfield?
Yeah, it's like we're going for a conference, or it's like a course, like a class on technical aspects of oil field geology and well drilling and abandonment. So I'm trying to understand better like how that actually all
so
goes.
like when you've got a platform that you don't take down.
Yeah, and like what does it take for somebody to plug and abandon a well? Which, I have heard from some people in the field that it's actually currently impossible to permanently plug an oil well.
What do? They just flood it with concrete?
It used to be that they would just shove trash and telephone poles into it.
Well, that's obviously not going to be the permanent solution.
Yeah.
I don't see what could go wrong with
They probably had a very technical explanation for it, but most wells are like, tons of these wells are leaking. People talk about natural seeps in Santa Barbara. Like, a lot of people...
What's a natural seep?
Well, the idea is that oil's always been seeping from the ground, that oil seeps from the seafloor. And I think that's true, that there are areas on the earth where oil naturally seeps out of seafloor. Yeah. And so one of the arguments for drilling oil was that we need to stop those from happening. So we need to extract the oil, and that there will be less oil in the sea if we pull it out.
We need to stop this natural process that's occurred as long as fossil fuels have been in the ground.
Yeah. Which is just a misunderstanding.
It's like how people talk about forest fires.
Right. So when somebody goes and destabilizes a bunch of the Earth's crusts to drill for oil, it's like now we have a new situation rather than the one that's been happening since forever.
Yeah, and as a stats person, climate change is interesting to me because, and just not just climate change, but just global change, the broader term. It's interesting because all of your statistical inferences are really great at interpolating within a range of conditions that you've observed in the past, right? If you have a cloud of data and you pick a point in the cloud that's surrounded by data points and there's nothing there, you can do a pretty good job at predicting some outcome within that cloud. Once you step out of the cloud, your model sucks. It's now going to give you all kinds of weird stuff. What we're doing now is we're with climate change and with a ton of anthropogenic stressors, new ones or old ones at a new intensity or duration, that's an extrapolation. You all your historical data is valuable, but you're trying to make predictions outside of your data cloud, and that's a challenge. You were describing to me earlier this morning, you have 3 pillars in your life that have been more or less unchanged, although the things that occupy those pillars have changed over the years. Your relationships, your career. Won't pry into the relationships one. And freediving. First of all, I just think it's amazing to meet someone who lived so deliberately, right? You charted a course for yourself, and you've really fulfilled all three of those really well over the course of your life, it seems. And I think that's just inspiring because you can set out to live a lifestyle and actually do it, right? A lot of the time feel forced into certain circumstances, but you've really kept that grip on what's important to you. So I want to applaud you in that. But yeah,
Thanks.
Freediving. Tell me the whole story of you becoming a freediver.
Yeah, I think like I go back and forth a little bit between like, that freediving and conservation are separate in my life, because there are times when I really want to find the marriage of those things, and I've done a few things that try to find the crossover. I find that freedivers are generally very conservation minded and sort of spiritually centered on it to some degree. For me, like, it was my marine biology education that got me into freediving, because I was studying coral reef ecology out in Australia on the Great Barrier Reef, and during this course I had breaks and where we just got to basically swim around in the ocean, and I just kept seeing things in the ocean that I wanted to go find that were just a little deeper than I had previously been. And I was like, freediving to go spend time sitting next to a giant clam, or like I saw like this massive fish swimming one level down, and I was like, I want to go spend time with that fish. And I'd recently learned about the mammalian dive reflex in the body of dolphins and whales. I didn't really make the connection that humans have it too, and that all mammals have certain physiological responses in our bodies that contribute to our ability to hold our breath underwater. And I think once I learned and started to experience the mammalian dive reflex in my own body, it felt like a rebirth. I was like, I'm a marine mammal. What have I been doing not being a marine mammal?
Yeah,
what have I been doing with my life?
Humans are semi-aquatic people. I mean, there's very old societies based around scavenging from the seafloor. I mean, if you even think about we talked a little bit about the ancient Greeks as being a civilization that erected a barrier between humans and the environment. This is a freediving civilization, though. In the ancient Olympics, one of the Olympic events was sponge diving.
What?
Yeah, so they would,
cool.
They had all the ones like running races and whatnot, and rowing of warships, but they also had freediving events. And what they would do at variable weight. For people listening, there's different ways to freedive. One is constant weight. You take everything you bring down with you, you bring up. So you can wear a weight belt. If you watch a competition, most likely they're doing constant weight. And it's just a broad category, that allows you to wear a weight belt, adjust your buoyancy. But for as much sinking power you're adding, you're making it harder on the way up. So it's a competitive kind of discipline. It's also very simple. That's one of the attractions of it as well. The variable weight is when you basically hold on to a heavy object that takes you to the bottom of the sea. And I understand why the Greeks would use that for sponge diving. They actually had special little stones where they could steer their way down. Wow. Don't ask me how they could see underwater, though, because I can't see much underwater without my dive mask, and I don't know if they had any kind of glass or goggles.
I have heard and seen in a documentary that kids who are raised in certain Indonesian countries can see really well underwater.
But only the kids.
But just the kids. Can the adults lose the ability over time, I think?
What a depressing thing that would happen. Imagine if you were a kid and you could see everything perfectly clearly underwater, and then you just lost that. Yeah,
I don't know. It would just be understood that that's your time to stop, being able to see well underwater. But
yeah, I guess you could just enjoy the times while they last.
I think it's just for me it was a rediscovery I think in grad school is when I kind of discovered freediving, and it was like this time in my life where my athletic endeavors were like, am I going to put my athletic endeavors on the back burner so I can really get serious and become a serious adult and focus on my studies and my
science, being a scientist?
Yeah. But the experience thrilled me so much that I actually left grad school and just pursued freediving for a while.
And where were you studying? Were you at Queensland?
I was in Queensland, yeah. I was in at James Cook University.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah. Really great place to go study corals and ecology.
Yeah, what is it like, the journey to the Barrier Reef? Because it's a pretty far offshore, and it's not very deep either. Like, what can you describe? Like, what do you see when you go on one of these expeditions?
Yeah, I can give it a shot. I mean, the reef, it starts somewhat close to shore up in the northern areas, and then it sort of branches off as you go south. And so the point at which we went offshore was about 45 minutes offshore on a boat to a marine research lab, and it was an island where the research lab was stationed, and there was a reef that became dry, like a long stretch of maybe 200 or 300 meters of reef that became exposed during part of the day, and then it got covered up as the tide came in.
Interesting.
So we would be out on the reef seeing all this beautiful life that was just waiting for the tide to come in, and just understanding. It was like a great place to study ecology because you get to kind of observe all these different things happening. And it just seemed to go on, and it seemed like there was never going to be an end to the amount of information that became available. But none of the students were going and looking underwater. We were all just kind of on the surface looking at the reef up top. What I remember was this beautiful clam. There are two different species of giant clam. There was, deadly cone snails, or these snails that could sting you and you become like paralyzed, or it could potentially
one sting.
Yeah.
Just one?
Yeah. They're,
man, that is treacherous. How frequently do you see them?
I saw probably 5 of them over the weekend.
It's the one you don't see that's dangerous.
Yeah. We saw this manta ray that was swimming around a lot, and so many beautiful things. It was amazing.
So you said you really spiritualized the mammalian dive response, and this is something that is very common among freedivers. Freedivers are a super spiritual bunch, I've noticed.
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah, because how could you not? How could you not spiritualize that to some degree? Because it's like at first you're a visitor, and then you realize actually your body has all these adaptations that allow you to do that thing. And why would you have that unless you were supposed to do it?
There's a lot of humans that have long-standing cultures that dove in the ocean and gathered things, like you said. But even thinking like about what unites us with dolphins, what we have in common, at some point in our evolution, I just think that's a beautiful thing to experience, our common kinship with the other mammals that live in the ocean. And so I kind of think of it as like a living monument to our relationship with the sea.
Because I guess, it just makes sense for any organism that requires air to go into air-saving mode when you are deprived of it, right? Like, probably everyone, when they're a kid, like, what if you slip into a pond and then, it's just better to conserve your air when you're down there. So I understand why that might be selected for evolution, for those who are always seeking to explain things evolutionarily. There is a great explanation for the mammalian dive response. But on the other hand, you also have adaptations that allow you to withstand the pressures of depth. That is different, right? No one just ends up at 40 meters. Or how much is 40 meters in feet? People probably speak feet.
Yeah, 130 feet?
Yeah, 130 feet. no one just mistakenly wakes up at like 100 to 200 feet of water. But your body can be trained to withstand that. You know, if you're not a freediver, do not try to do that because you get punished. You know, me and Brady have both had our experiences with pressure-related injuries. But it's possible to harness some element of adaptation, and some people take it 130 meters. You know, Alexei Molchanov is doing 130 meters, 130 something meters nowadays.
Yeah, it's 14 atmospheres, so his lungs are compressed to 1/14 of their normal size.
Yeah, these guys are crazy, and they're total specimens, but what they're using, every human possesses in varying degrees. So yeah, how could you not spiritualize that?
Yeah, I think it's amazing too. Like it's like a yogic practice. I mean, people that practice yoga and really get into it and really get into the presence that exists in yoga is like listening. Sort of, you get into this sort of trance, and so well, in all forms of yoga, you know, when you're stretching your muscles or you're like reaching a certain limit, you're approaching a limit, allowing your tissues to adapt as you breathe. In freediving, you're allowing your tissues to adapt sort of over a longer period of time. But it's important to like ease in and, you know, do a dive to 20 meters or 10 meters over and over again, and your tissues can adapt so that you know.
In terms of conserving oxygen, relaxing the mind, like...
Yeah, like a couple freedivers, including myself, I've just, after a dive, they'll just kind of let out a sigh, and it's like a long sigh. So like after a really long dive, sometimes I'll just instinctively have this like loud sigh, and it's like an instant
Can you demonstrate?
Relief to the
Now demonstrate.
Nah. come to a competition and you'll see me probably do that. But yeah, it's like an instant relief to the nervous system.
I think freediving is so cool. I mean, the reason I started freediving is because I wanted to hold my breath longer. Because, you know, I also like to surf, and some surf spots, it's useful to have a greater capacity to hold your breath. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to learn how to freedive. I also wanted to shoot fish. I wanted to be a spear fisherman. I ended up freediving a lot and not shooting very many fish.
Yeah.
For various reasons. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting how like your career path kind of almost led you naturally into freediving.
You know, it's on one level, it's just I ended up in this setting in the Great Barrier Reef where I wanted to go a little deeper to see more things. On another level, I became curious about my interactions with the species of the ocean. I wanted to know if a freediver would observe something different in the behavior of marine animals than a scuba diver would. Yeah, then the experience of being in the ocean and sort of having this experience as an aquatic being without scuba was like pretty transformative. And it was like, oh, I can do yoga in the ocean.
And you came from a competitive swimming background, is that true? Yeah. So
yeah, like swimming,
that's like the best background.
Yeah, because swimming gave me a lot of aquatic skills and athletic ability. It also set me up for a bit of a trap too, because I was so super competitive, and so now when I compete, what I was used to doing is like when I see a swimming pool, my heart rate just automatically increases because
that's horrible.
I just know that I'm about to race. But for the competitive disciplines that I do now, it's really important for my heart rate to stay low, and so I have to adopt an entirely new mindset when it comes to like my relationship with the pool.
Like high level training too, probably there's some amount of dread at seeing like an 8-lane pool or something.
Fortunately for me, I I think a lot of swimmers burn out at a young age and they're forced to continue swimming, but for me it wasn't ever like that. I just always loved it.
Brady, you've done like extremely long performances. I don't know if you're like guarded about your personal bests or anything, but like even just yesterday you were telling me you did 2 dives that, if recorded properly, would constitute huge, like, records, national records by a large margin, which you possess yourself. But you know, really breaking new ground. Can you describe physically the end, like the last few bits of those dives? Because I think a lot of freedivers know the feeling of the beginning of a dive, and when you start to reach your limit, or maybe reach into the red zone, right? But only the competitors, I think, really get the last bit of juice out of the bottle. You know, so can you describe a bit of like what are you experiencing in those moments?
Yeah, because you know, this is a niche part of freediving, is where you get to the point where you can push past the initial urge to breathe and go into the later stage of the dive, which is like the strong impulses, and also, you know, get in towards hypoxia, which actually becomes more peaceful and euphoric towards the end of a long dive for me. So, you know, for most of my dive, I'm convincing myself to keep going. And that's, you know, I can do, let's take a 200 meter distance, for example.
And for those listening, we're talking about dynamic freediving. So you may be familiar with depth freediving, open water freediving, where you're going vertically, but this is a distance horizontally underwater in pool, which is Brady's specialty. He also does open water, but he's the man when it comes to dynamic freediving. But anyway, proceed.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for the clarification. Yeah, so I'm covering 200 meters of horizontal distance, and over the first, say, 100 meters, I'm trying to just basically convince myself to be quiet in my head, just calm down my mind, let go of all the anticipation of what this dive might become. And then after that point, it becomes really difficult, and I feel like a lot of pain, and like, sort of not pain, but just, you know, like the reactions my body's going through that are really not comfortable. It's the urge to breathe, and it's more my mind starts getting really active at that point.
What do you think about? What did you think about yesterday?
It's always some form of, you can't do this, you can't do it, this is not your day. The mental chatter becomes like, you already trained too hard this week, you should scale it back, stop going. There's all these...
Is there any fear in there?
It's more just like this annoying, nagging, like...
A doubter.
Give up.
Wow.
Yeah, like you should give up.
How do you defeat that voice?
I just tell it no. Like I'm like, that's not an option. And I do that every single time. And I do that every time up until about 70% of my personal best distance. So let's say we're at 100 meters. I've covered half the distance of the dive I'm about to do. And say my personal best is 200 meters. I'm telling myself, you have to do this extra 50 meters here, no matter what. That's mandatory. Even if I got slapped in the face right before my dive, or even if my wetsuit was like falling off, or like something was going terribly wrong, I'm like, I don't have an out. I'm not allowed to stop. And make sure I get to the 150 wall. And then after that, I treat everything as bonus. Once it starts getting easier, that's when you start getting in towards the red zone, at least in my experience. So that's when I sort of switch gears from telling myself to calm down. Now I'm starting to automatically calm down. And that's when I have to tell myself to be very alert and attentive to what my body is experiencing. And I open my eyes wide and I stare at the bottom of the pool, so that if my eyes start to shut and I'm not able to keep them wide open, I just get right up and out of the water.
And is that when you came up yesterday?
Yesterday I had plenty in the tank, but I actually limited my dive to a certain. I told myself I'd do no more than 216, and I ended up doing 223, and I was like, okay, stop, because I'm trying to kind of budget my energy a little bit this week, just for the general public to know, like, it's important to tell people, like, you have to be a certified safety and have a certified safety in order to freedive. And
yeah, if you don't have a safety and you black out, you're done. There's nothing that's going to pull you out of the water.
Yeah.
And you're not going to wake up until there's new, fresh oxygen available, and your body has ways of detecting that.
What I also want the general public to know is that freediving safety is pretty straightforward. It's just protecting the airway. So
yeah, especially in a pool.
Yeah. It's a whole topic to go into.
Yeah.
Freediving safety.
It's the most fun part of learning how to be a freediver, I think. Simulation.
Yeah, knowing that you can, and knowing that people around you can feel really safe is rewarding. I think especially at this stage in the sport where it used to be in the Olympics way long ago, right? We wanted to be in the Olympics again.
Olympics.
The ancient Olympics.
Sponge diving.
Yeah.
Bring sponge... Dude, but that's how we get freediving back. Bring sponge diving
We'll call it sponge diving. Yeah.
And just without sponges. With tags.
But yeah, like, the sport is under the lens right now. There's a lot of documentaries coming out, and...
Yeah, what do you think about the deepest breath?
Fear-mongering. I mean, the first word that comes to mind, it's a real story, but, it's drama. And I think a lot of people, after seeing that movie, I loved watching it. Like, it was well done. But, like, I think a lot of people came away with the conclusion that freediving is just downright dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, I think Alessia is definitely on the cavalier side of freedivers.
Yeah, just like Alex Honnold is for free climbing. And what he did was sketchy, but that doesn't mean that all climbing is sketchy. It just sucks when somebody sees that documentary and then thinks that, nobody should be allowed to train in pools in the United States.
When's your next competition?
End of June in Japan, World Championships.
Yeah, are you gonna set some records there?
If things keep going the way they are this season, then yeah. But I'm just gonna approach each dive like it's just another training dive.
Do you ever do other freediving sports like underwater hockey or underwater rugby?
I haven't. I've been so focused on dynamic and loving it so much that it's hard for me to branch out. Last year was really exciting because all of a sudden there was like 8 people in contention for the U.S. records, and I felt the competitive nature, and we were all making each other stronger. And I was friends with a lot of them.
But then you showed them how weak they really are.
No, like I still have my eyes out. I'm like, you guys are just gonna creep up one of these days. But I'm also like looking at world, like I think yesterday I followed like all the top 10 dynamic athletes on Instagram because I want to like watch what they're doing and gain inspiration from them. Like I realized that I'm now like I can realistically set my sights on like some of the top 10 spots and think about going to World Games and think about placing on the podium at World Championships. Like that's something that I'm trying to aim towards. It's really fun to know the individuals that I'm competing with and like appreciate them and celebrate them and also want to take them down.
Yeah, I don't think I could ever enter the world of competitive freediving unless I put like a lot of dedication into it. Because you saw me that's the only competition I ever did was the one that I saw you at. And
well, you shouldn't have gone spearfishing the day before.
Yeah, I spent the whole day before spearing because I was like trying to relax, trying not to take it too seriously. And then I texted you the night before and I was like, Brady, I'm nervous. What did you do? And you're like, drink some alcohol.
And then have one glass of wine.
All right, I ended up taking 2 shots and then going to sleep. And then I woke up and I felt horrible.
No, I'm like, was I not specific enough? It should be 1 glass of red wine.
I think you probably said no. You did mention the red wine, but I don't drink wine. I drink whiskey.
Yeah, whiskey's a beautiful thing.
Well, Brady, it was great having you on. Wish you best of luck in your training and your activism. And you've just moved to Northern California, so I'll say officially welcome to NorCal.
Thank you. I always enjoy our conversations ever since the first time we sat down at a coffee shop and got deep onto some topics. So this was another great time to just drop into some cool stuff. Thanks for bringing me on.
This has been the Marine Ecology Podcast. You can help us grow by sharing this episode on social media and with friends and family. Before you go, I have 2 important announcements to make regarding the podcast. Firstly, I'm actively in search of new guests. If you yourself are a researcher, conservationist, policymaker, or have a hand in the marine world in some other way, I would love the chance to talk to you. If you've listened this far, hopefully you have a good sense of my format. If you're interested in coming on and having a fun, engaging conversation, please email me at themarineecologypodcast@gmail.com. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Secondly, I would love to connect with you all on Instagram, where you can find me at the handle Marine Ecology Podcast. I'm on there regularly and encourage you to share your perspectives there on the topics we discussed today, whether in the comments section or via direct messaging. The topics we covered are far-reaching, and every voice is of tremendous value to me. If you would like to offer constructive criticism or would like to contact me for any other reason, please email me at themarineecologypodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much again for listening. It's been a pleasure having you with us today, and I wish you all the very best.